So, welcome back to another episode of... come to think of it, I don't have any names for this show yet. If you have any suggestions, do let me know. Last week, I went through the topic on the resurrection of Jesus. This week, I'm going to be talking about, drumroll, the Crucifixion of Jesus. The crucifixion of Jesus is one of the critical components of the gospel, also known as the Injil. If Jesus wasn't crucified, then Christianity is false, my faith is useless, and once again, you might as well go listen to Donald Trump say China on repeat.
China, 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 China.
I guess what I'm trying to tell you is that the crucifixion of Jesus is not just a theological or philosophical question. Because Jesus was a man who lived in the 1st century, then investigating his life is a historical process. Therefore, making the crucifixion of Jesus also a historical question. So how do we actually know if Jesus actually did die on the cross? If you say I'm going to quote the Bible, then you are absolutely, completely wrong. What do you mean? I'm actually going to look at non-Christian sources to prove the crucifixion of Jesus.
Okay, it's not a terrible idea.
Yes, that's right, non-Christian sources. So, let us go back in time.
You've got to come back with me!
Where?
Back to the future!
When you take a look back at history, there's actually more historical records of Jesus than any other person during that time. What do I mean by this? What do you mean? The Emperor of Rome during that time was Tiberius, and there are only 10 historical records about him. Yes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10.
On the 10th day of Christmas, my true love said to me, 10 lords and
Now, when you take a look at Jesus, there's over 40 historical sources about him during that time. That's a high amount of sources for someone who never really existed or someone so insignificant. So, let us quickly go through what these sources are. Jewish sources such as Flavius Josephus, Marabah Serapion, and the Jewish Talmud talks about the death of Jesus by crucifixion. Roman historian Cornelius Tacitus talks about the death of Jesus by crucifixion. A pagan like Lucian Samosata talks about the death of Jesus by crucifixion. And the Greek historian Thales talks about the death of Jesus by crucifixion. So you have the Jewish people, the Romans, the pagans, and the Greeks talking about the death of Jesus by crucifixion. What makes these sources reliable is that these sources are the earliest historical sources about the crucifixion of Jesus. Furthermore, these sources were written by the enemies of the early Christians. What do I mean by that? What do you mean? Two things. First of all, let's talk about the sources. Now, it says a lot when your enemies agree with you. It's sort of when Daniel defeats Johnny in the Karate Kid, and Johnny hands over the trophy to Daniel. There's no reason for the enemies of the early Christians to agree with them, because the crucifixion of Jesus is one of the main pillars of the gospel. Also, the resurrection caused Christianity to explode overnight, and that posed a problem for Jewish and Roman officials.
I got one less problem without you. I got one less problem without you.
Why not just say Jesus didn't die? Because if he didn't die, he couldn't have resurrected from the dead. Everyone during the 1st century knew that Jesus died. So you see multiple sources of the death of Jesus by crucifixion during the period in the 1st century. Now, if we were to say that these sources are unreliable because they were written so long ago, as a result we are not able to determine how accurate they are, then to be consistent, we need to consider these other sources unreliable too. For example, the early works of Plato was discovered only 1200 years after his death. As for Alexander the Great, his earliest biographies were only made available 400 years after he died. As for Sahih Bukhari, what Sunni Muslims consider to be the most authentic historical source on the life of Muhammad, that was only compiled 200 years later after the death of Muhammad. Now, just to clarify, I'm not saying the works of Plato, Alexander the Great and Imam Bukhari are inaccurate.
What do you mean?
What I'm saying is, if we consider these sources to be credible despite the huge time gap, then to be consistent, we need to apply the same level of credibility to the various sources on the crucifixion of Jesus. Now, when we compare these stories from non-Christian sources with Christian sources such as the Gospels from Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, they actually align and they say the same thing. They basically have the same account of the crucifixion as found in the Gospels. That is what we call empirical adequacy, one of the criteria for the test of truth. As a result, we can confidently say that the crucifixion of Jesus is a historical, undisputable fact. Now, before you dismiss what I'm saying,
Bye, Felicia.
let's consider the opinions of scholars who have dedicated their lives to studying the historical Jesus. Nearly 100% of them would say and agree that the death of Jesus by crucifixion is a historical fact and indisputable. Just so that I'm not biased, let's take a look at what atheist and agnostic scholars have to say about this matter. There is a really long list, but I'm only going to quote 3 of them. Atheist scholar Gerd Ludemann says, Jesus' death as a consequence of crucifixion is indisputable. John Dominic Crossan from the Jesus Seminar says that he was crucified is as sure as anything historical can ever be. And the greatest critic of Christianity, Mr. Bart Ehrman says, one of the most certain facts of history is that Jesus was crucified on orders of the Roman prefect of Judea, Pontius Pilate. What does this all mean? I have provided the earliest historical evidence about the crucifixion of Jesus, as well as secondary evidence from the conclusions of atheist and agnostic scholars. We can be sure of 2 things. 1, that Jesus did exist, and 2, that he did die on the cross. Because the crucifixion of Jesus did happen, then atheists like Richard Price and Robert Carrier, who says that Jesus is a myth and he never existed, they will need to reconsider their position and write a new book that Jesus did exist. If not, they run the risk of losing their seat like this guy. And if Jesus did die by crucifixion, then Muslims need to start asking questions to their sheikhs, their imams, their mullahs, their ustads about Surah 4:157. Because Surah 4:157 says, Wama katalu wama salabu. Basically, Jesus did not die, Jesus wasn't crucified. They killed him not and they crucified him not. This story, that verse in the Quran, does not line up with the earliest historical evidence of the crucifixion and it contradicts history. Logically speaking, if you can trust a source that came 500 years later that spoke about this incident, why wouldn't you trust the earliest sources that were written within the first 100 years, especially since we have multiple sources of evidence for the crucifixion of Jesus? Before rolling your eyes at me again like this girl, I urge you to examine the evidence and come to your own conclusions. Simon Greenleaf, a professor of jurisprudence, says this about the New Testament. You may choose to say, I do not believe at all, but you may not say that is not enough evidence. For those of us who are searching for truth, remember this, truth does not bend to fit belief, but belief has to bend to fit truth. Thank you all for watching. In my next episode, I'm going to be talking about the Bible. And remember this, follow the evidence wherever it leads. I love you guys. Peace out.